Betrayal in relationships is not a criminal offense, nor is it punishable by law. However, it is a deliberate act of harm against someone who has placed complete trust in you. Such actions can cause immense emotional suffering and sometimes set off a chain of events that lead to actual crimes. It's no wonder that Dante described betrayal as the worst of all sins, condemning traitors to the ninth circle of hell. The story of Katie Cho seemed strange from the very beginning. Investigators initially suspected that the young woman may have run away from her strict parents, been abducted by one of her many online admirers, or even decided to take an impulsive trip with someone without telling anyone. There was even speculation that her parents themselves might have been involved in her disappearance. Unfortunately, Katie was never seen alive again. Many people in her circle began to behave oddly, raising suspicions for over a year. The investigation was at a standstill until unexpected clues surfaced from a place no one anticipated. Shockingly, the perpetrator had been hiding in plain sight all along, even managing to deceive a polygraph test. The Cho family background. Henry and Deborah Cho were originally from a small province in Taiwan in 1989, seeking a better life. They emigrated to the United States and settled in Renton, a city in King County, Washington, just a short drive from Seattle at the time of their move. The couple spoke little to no English, making it extremely difficult to adjust to their new environment. They lived an isolated and private life, rarely socializing with neighbors or the local community. On April 21, 1991, Henry and Deborah welcomed their only child, a daughter named Katie. Unlike her parents, who struggled to connect with others, Katie grew up as a cheerful, outgoing, and lively young woman. She had a natural ability to make friends, but her upbringing was marked by strict discipline, rooted in her parents' cultural values and traditions. Katie was not allowed to invite friends over, and she was required to account for where she was and with whom at all times. As she grew older, this oppressive environment became increasingly difficult for her. Though Katie obeyed her parents, the rules often left her feeling stifled and lonely. In high school, created several profiles on social media platforms where she freely shared details about herself, her hobbies, and her life. Through these platforms, she found ways to socialize and bypass some of the restrictions her parents imposed. She even gained a modest level of online popularity, which helped her cope with her lack of freedom in the real world. When Katie began dating and showing interest in boys, her father's disapproval grew harsher. Henry criticized every young man she spent time with, deeply disliking the more relaxed and independent lifestyles of American teenagers. He firmly believed that his daughter should marry someone from Taiwan, not a local. Henry often confided in Deborah about his growing disappointment with life in America. He expressed regret about immigrating and frequently mentioned his desire to return to their homeland. The popular guy and the best friend in the fall of 2009, 18-year-old Katie Cho was in her senior year of high school when she began a romantic relationship with a young man named Ezekiel, or just Zeke Watkins. Zeke was 2.5 years older than Katie but had attended the same Renton high school, so they had known each other since their teenage years. The relationship lasted only a couple of months, and during that time, Zeke never once visited Katie's home. They would meet in neutral places or spend time at Zeke's apartment, which he shared with a friend. The reason for this was simple. Mr. Cho strongly disapproved of Zeke. He found the young man's unconventional appearance and bold behavior completely unacceptable. Zeke was a musician and had been a popular figure since his high school days. He always had plenty of admirers and frequently changed girlfriends when he began to show interest in Katie. She was overjoyed. She was so determined to keep seeing him that she defied her parents' wishes and occasionally lied to her father to sneak out on dates with Zeke. However, after the new year, Katie's relationship with Zeke ended just as abruptly as it had started. Zeke's interest in her faded, and he soon began pursuing other young women. His new romantic interest turned out to be Jamie Marlowe, one of Katie's classmates and her closest friend. Whether it was intentional or not, the situation devastated Katie. Katie had genuinely loved Zeke. It was her first serious romantic relationship, something that had felt meaningful and full of potential. She was not ready to let go of him so easily and was determined to win him back. Naturally, her friendship with Jamie crumbled, and Katie now viewed her former best friend as both a rival and an enemy. At first, people around them assumed that Katie and Zeke had ended things on good terms, and continued to maintain a friendly relationship before long, though Kate began going on dates with other young men, seemingly trying to prove to herself to those around her, and especially to Zeke, that she was still desirable. However, this unorthodox approach and Katie's desperate attempts to reconnect with Zeke ultimately led to a tragedy. Where did Katie go on April 19, 2010? Henry and Deborah Cho contacted local law enforcement to report their daughter missing. The night before Sunday, Katie had gone out with friends, taking only her phone, and had not returned home. According to her parents, she was supposed to be back by 8:30 p.m. But when she didn't arrive at the agreed time, her father tried calling her. Strangely, Katie didn't pick up. It was completely out of character for Katie to ignore her father's calls, which immediately raised concerns at 9:30 p.m. Henry Cho received a message from his daughter, Katie. She said she was having coffee with a friend at the local mall and would be a little late naturally. This behavior frustrated her father, but he and his wife patiently waited for her to return. When midnight came and went without any sign of Katie and her phone had been turned off, her parents grew increasingly alarmed. They began calling Katie's friends, but no one had seen her that evening, taking matters into their own hands. Henry and Deborah went to the shopping mall themselves. By that time, the mall was already closed, except for the movie theater and a few cafes. But Katie was nowhere to be found. The tension in the Chu household continued to build. But the couple still hoped their rebellious daughter had simply stayed out too late and would return soon by Moore with no word from her. Henry and Deborah went to the police station to file a missing person report. Katie did not show up for school that day. This immediately alarmed her teachers and classmates, as she had always been a diligent student who never skipped classes without a valid reason. On top of that, it turned out that Katie had not arranged to meet any friends the night before, leading her parents to suspect that she might have lied to them and gone on a date. The question was with whom. This was something the police would need to figure out. The first suspect. Although Katie was only days away from turning 19, investigators treated her disappearance with the utmost seriousness. From the very beginning, they immediately launched a search, interviewing her friends and acquaintances in an effort to gather any information that might provide a lead. Unfortunately, their efforts initially led nowhere. Detectives reached out to the cell phone provider and discovered that Katie's phone had last connected to a network at 9:30 p.m. The signal came from a local park bordering a large marshy area. This revelation raised troubling questions. Katie had not been at the mall as she had claimed. Instead, she had been in the park where she sent her last message to her father before turning off her phone, and it had not been turned on since detectives decided their first course of action would be to speak with Katie's ex-boyfriend, Zeke Watkins, and brought him in for questioning. The young man appeared visibly nervous but seemed genuinely concerned about Katie's disappearance. Zeke told investigators that he and Katie had broken up about 3 months earlier, but had remained friends according to him. They had both moved on and were seeing other people, so there were no hard feelings between them. He even went on to suggest that Katie had been dating multiple people at the same time, although he claimed not to know the names of any of her supposed new romantic interests when questioned about his whereabouts on the night his ex-girlfriend Tichu disappeared. Zeke explained that he had been at home with his roommate Joe Carpenter. The two shared an apartment and had spent the evening playing video games until around 3 a.m., after which they went to bed. Zeke's alibi was supported by a neighbor who also knew Katie from school and was eager to help the police with their investigation. Zeke admitted that Katie had messaged him earlier that evening, asking to meet up. However, he told her he had other plans because he simply didn't feel like going out. The truth, he explained, was that Katie often tried to reconnect with him, and he assumed she wanted to discuss their relationship again. Not wanting to have that conversation, he made an excuse about being busy on the surface. Zeke's story seemed believable. Still, investigators were reluctant to remove him from the list of potential suspects. His alibi had only been corroborated by his roommate, so detectives asked Zeke to take a polygraph test. After some hesitation, he agreed. The results largely confirmed his account, though a few of his responses weren't entirely clear. Investigators noted this as a minor discrepancy within the standard margin of error. Ultimately, they decided Zeke was unlikely to be involved in Katie's disappearance and released him from further questioning. The next person investigators brought in for questioning was Jamie Marlowe, Katie's former best friend. The two had fallen out over Zeke, but their conflict had never escalated into an open confrontation, at least not publicly. Still, their friends were well aware of the tension between them, as previously mentioned. Katie had been trying to win Zeke back, a situation that understandably upset his new girlfriend Jai. But could Jamie have taken matters into her own hands and harmed Katie? It was a difficult question to answer. Jai's behavior during the interview raised some eyebrows. She seemed unusually shaken and appeared close to tears while answering the detective's questions when asked about her demeanor. Jamie attributed her emotional state to the stress of the situation. She admitted to having fought with Katie because Zeke had left Katie for her. However, Jimmy firmly stated that she had no intention of giving up on Zeke, as she too had strong feelings for him, despite the tension between the two former friends. Kaime's alibi for the night of Katie's disappearance was solid. She had been attending a family celebration at a relative's house in a neighboring town. Jimmy left the event just after midnight and went home with her parents and two older sisters. Her story was verified, and Jamie was quickly ruled out as a suspect. What were the parents hiding? Many of Katie Cho's friends mentioned that she was active not only on social media, but also on dating websites, where she would sometimes meet new people. Lately, she had been on dates with several young men, and there were even rumors that she had been involved in multiple relationships at the same time. However, no one seemed to know the name of these mysterious individuals. The answers to many of the questions investigators had could likely be found in Katie's laptop, which contained her accounts and private messages. However, the police unexpectedly hit a roadblock. Katie's parents refused to let them enter the house, search her room, or take any of her personal belongings. Henry and Deborah's behavior struck investigators as odd, and it seemed as though they were hiding something. The authorities tried to explain to Mr. and Mrs. Chu that Katie's laptop could contain valuable clues, perhaps even the name of someone who might have wanted to harm her or was involved in her disappearance. To uncover this information, specialists needed access to her online accounts. Nevertheless, Henry and Deborah refused to cooperate. They insisted that they would take the laptop to a programmer. They knew who would unlock Katie's profiles. They promised to look through the contents themselves first and then hand everything over to the police. On April 21st, investigators summoned Katie's parents for questioning and suggested that they take a polygraph test. Deborah broke down in tears, immediately saying she could not go through with it. Henry reluctantly agreed, but he was clearly on edge. His behavior during the test was highly emotional. He would alternate between shouting and breaking down in tears while answering questions. In the end, Henry failed the polygraph further, intensifying suspicions surrounding the couple determined to uncover the truth. Detectives decided to speak with the Chu's neighbors, and what they learned was intriguing. The neighbors explained that Henry and Deborah had moved into the house in 1989 after immigrating to the United States, but over the course of 20 years, they had never formed close friendships. The Cho family was known for keeping to themselves. They rarely socialized, never invited anyone into their home, and avoided visiting others. Even Katie's friends had never been allowed inside the house. The CHS weren't described as rude. They were simply private people who kept the outside world at arm's length. Henry and Deborah were deeply concerned about Katie's reputation and had always been wary of her friends and social activities. This concern, according to the investigators, explained their refusal to release the laptop. They wanted to know what their daughter had been involved in before handing it over. But why did they fail the polygraph? The answer turned out to be relatively simple. That day, April 21st, was Katie's birthday. She had been missing for 3 days, and her parents were at an emotional breaking point, overwhelmed by worry, fear, and grief. They knew they were unlikely to pass the test because of their mental and emotional state. A few days later, Henry returned to the station voluntarily with Katie's laptop. This time he agreed to take another polygraph test. The results showed that Henry was telling the truth, clearing him of any involvement in his daughter's disappearance. Katie's 8 admirers, Katie Cho's parents, feared that her laptop might contain private photos or videos that could damage her reputation, and they were determined to keep this from becoming public. Fortunately, nothing of the sort was found. However, investigators discovered that Katie had been chatting with 8 different young men online and had gone on at least a couple of dates with each of them. Katie enjoyed male attention and often boasted about it to her friends. Some speculated that she was trying to make Zeke jealous, regardless of her motives. Every one of these young men now had to be investigated for any connection to Katie's disappearance thanks to her message. History police were able to identify their names, phone numbers, and even the dates and locations where Katie had met with them over the next couple of days. Detectives managed to track down all 8 individuals and bring them in for questioning. The youngest was 17 years old and the oldest was 24. Katie had met all of them online, and none of them had known each other previously. She had been the one to initiate contact and arrange the dates, but it was clear that she hadn't been in a serious relationship with any of them. Still, investigators considered the possibility that one of them had developed strong feelings for Katie, perhaps even to the point of becoming possessive or jealous. 5 of the young men had solid, verifiable alibis for the night. Katie disappeared, 2 being out of town. One was working an overnight shift, another was recovering in the hospital after a car accident, and one had spent the entire night at a bar with friends, a claim backed up by security camera footage. The remaining 3, who did not have airtight alibis, agreed to take polygraph tests and were cleared of any involvement in Katie's disappearance. A dead end in the investigation for several weeks. Search teams combed through the marshy area behind the park, where Katie's phone signal had last been detected. Despite their best efforts, no trace of her was found. Investigators also came up empty-handed when searching for witnesses who might have seen Katie in the park that evening. Flyers with Katie's photo were posted throughout the city, and groups were formed on social media where friends and acquaintances shared information and theories about her disappearance. News outlets ran segments about the case urging anyone with relevant information to come forward. The police received hundreds of tips from people claiming to have seen Katie the night she vanished or even later across different parts of the city. Unfortunately, every lead turned out to be a false alarm. In each case, it was a different young woman with a similar appearance, often of Asian descent. The investigation quickly reached a dead end with no new evidence, leads, or witnesses to follow progress. Stalled by this point, few doubted that Katie was no longer alive. However, the mystery remained what had happened to her and who was responsible. The fear lingered that a dangerous individual was still out there posing a potential threat to others, an unexpected clue in April 2011. A year after Katie Cho's disappearance, some of her friends noticed something odd. Jamie Marlowe, who was still dating Zeke Watkins at the time, had started wearing black top sneakers with white platforms and distinctive lacing, exactly like the pair Katie had bought just weeks before she vanished. The shoes were unique enough that it was difficult to confuse them with any other pair. By then, Katie's former classmates had graduated high school and moved on with their lives, rarely seeing each other. Still, the rumor about Jaime's shoes spread quickly. Someone even managed to snap a photo of her wearing them and shared it on social media. Not long after, police received a call from a man named Giovanni Candelario, who claimed to have important information regarding Katie's disappearance. Giovanni was a friend of Joe Carpenter, Zeke Watkins' roommate. Back in April of the previous year, Giovanni had been staying at their apartment temporarily following a fight with his girlfriend. Despite this, he hadn't come up in the investigation and was never questioned by the police. He admitted to knowing Katie through mutual friends, though they had never been particularly close. Giovanni told police that on April 18, 2010, the night Katie disappeared, Zeke hadn't returned home at 8 p.m., as he originally claimed. Instead, Giovanni recalled Zeke arriving closer to midnight. At the time, Giovanni had been playing a video game, but couldn't help noticing that Zeke was covered in mud. When Giovanni asked him about it, Zeke explained that he had been riding his bike off-road, fallen into a puddle, and gotten dirty. Shortly after, Zeke asked Joe Carpenter to come outside with him. Giovanni wasn't sure how long the two were gone because he had fallen asleep. When detectives asked Giovanni why he hadn't come forward sooner, he admitted that he hadn't thought much of the detail at the time. Zeke had been quickly ruled out as a suspect, and Giovanni himself was never asked to provide a statement. However, after witnessing Zeke's increasingly strange and aggressive behavior, and especially after noticing that James was now wearing shoes identical to Katie's, Giovanni decided it was time to go to the police. At first, investigators were skeptical of Giovanni's story. They suspected he may have had a falling out with Zeke and was trying to get back at him. Nevertheless, his claims needed to be verified, so detectives brought Joe Carpenter in for another round of questioning. A chilling confession. Initially, Carpenter stuck to the same version of events he had given a year earlier. However, when investigator confronted him with Giovanni's statements, Carpenter's demeanor suddenly changed. He hesitated for a moment before asking, "What kind of sentence am I looking at for covering up a crime? Is there any way to reduce it if I cooperate?" Realizing the gravity of the situation, Carpenter struck a deal with the police in exchange for leniency. He agreed to tell them everything he knew and to reveal where Katie's remains could be found. Carpenter went to great length to minimize his role in the events, insisting he had never wanted to lie to investigators in the first place. According to him, he had only kept quiet because he feared Zeke might harm him too. He confirmed that Zeke returned home around midnight that night, covered in mud. Carpenter also recalled seeing a fresh cut near Zeke's ear, which had gone unnoticed during the investigation, because Zeke had a beard at the time. The shocking revelation: Zeke Watkins told his roommate Joe Carpenter that he needed help. He asked Joe to grab a small shovel from the trunk of his car. The two of them walked together into the marshy area behind the park, trudging through about 50 yards of overgrown brush. There they stopped near Katie Cho's lifeless body. Zeke claimed that everything had happened accidentally, that he had only been defending himself, and begged Joe to help him hide the body together. They dragged the body deeper into the dense thicket, moving another several dozen yards until the brush became nearly impassable. There they dug a shallow grave, placed Cut-Eye inside, and covered her with dirt and branches. Even a year later, Joe was able to lead investigators to the exact burial spot, using a large fallen tree nearby as a marker. Zeke was arrested the same day, but he vehemently denied committing a crime, insisting that it had been an accident. He admitted that he had agreed to meet Katie that day after she messaged him, but he claimed she had been aggressive and confrontational. According to Zeke, Katie was still trying to reconcile with him and had openly told him as much to avoid drawing attention. Zeke suggested they walk to the marshy area nearby to continue their conversation. Once there, the argument escalated. Zeke claimed that Katie's behavior became even more heated at some